I'd never heard a good song about a stockbroker or a lawyer. There are hundreds about farmers and fishermen. So at age 14, I dropped out of high school and headed out to sea. And I fished the Grand Banks, the Georges Banks, was down in the States, tuna, cod, crab, you name it, I fished it. And I ended up in Alaska on the Bering Sea fishing cod and crab. This was the late 80s, early 90s. And God, I love that job, right? The humility of being in 30-foot, 40-foot seas, that sense of solidarity of being in the belly of a boat with 13 other people working 20-hour shifts, and again, that pride of feeding my country. Most of my fish was going to McDonald's. And my grandma lived to be 101. And right up to the end, we used to go out to McDonald's, get a fish sandwich, sit down, and she'd look at me and say, who knows, maybe it's one of yours. So, loved it, and I still miss industrial fishing so much. The trouble was, we just got too good at our jobs. We were tearing up entire ecosystems with our trawls, chasing fewer and fewer fish further and further out to sea. And the ocean just couldn't keep up. So I was in Alaska, and in 1992, the cod stocks crashed back in Newfoundland in my home. 30,000 Newfoundlanders thrown out of work, largest layoff in Canadian history. And, you see an economy built up over hundreds of years, decimated overnight. And you just realize there are going to be no jobs on a dead ocean. I was an environmentalist. I didn't care about birds and bees and bears, but realized this was not about ecology. This was about kitchen table economy issues. So I went on this search for sustainability. And I had no idea what that was. There was no environmental consciousness. All it was I wanted to find a different relationship to the sea. So I ended up in the aquaculture farms. And that was supposed to be the answer to overfishing, right? We were going to create a blue economy, transition fishermen, we're going to feed the planet. Instead, it was everything a solution should not be. It was just the same destruction using different means, right? We were using 3 pounds of wild fish to feed 1 pound, to grow 1 pound of salmon, antibiotics, pesticides, polluting local waterways, and our fish tasted terrible, right? This was neither fish nor food. So disillusioned, I kept searching, and I ended up in the U.S. in Long Island Sound. I chased a woman completely, legally chased her down there, and found this whole oyster industry, right? There have been people for hundreds of years growing oysters and shellfish. And so I'm like, okay, I'll do this. Bought a boat, bought some gear, put it in the water, bought some seed, thought I was an ocean farmer, and immediately killed millions and millions of oysters, right? I was running a death camp out there on my 20 acres. Farming was so different than chasing fish. It was sort of slow and boring. The rogue waves were 3 feet tall. There were no thrilling stories of hunting. If I went to the same bars as I used to, I'd get beat up for sure. I thought my future was going to be drinking tea with kale farmers. But over time, I developed this blue thumb. My nervous system slowed down, and I fell in love with this idea of cultivation, the sweet waters, we call them, where the salt water meets the fresh water. It's the most productive ecosystem on the globe, right? So planting seeds, shaping the oysters, learning about merroirs, how tastes change throughout the season and place to place. So this collapse of the fisheries forced my transition to an ocean farmer, and I had to say goodbye to chasing fish, and it still hurts me to think about that. But I got to keep these core pieces of what it was to be a fisherman, to own that boat, to have a self-directed life, to succeed and fail, and to have that pride of feeding my local community. So I did that for about 7 years, built a successful oyster business outside New York City, and then the storms hit. Hurricane Irene, Hurricane Sandy came running in, boiled in, destroyed 90% of my farm, most of my gear washed out to sea. That was 2 years. If it had been 1 year, so what? I'd rebuild. 2 years in a row, this was suddenly the new normal, right? Climate change at that point was supposed to be a slow lobster boil, right? 100-year problem for our grandkids. Instead, it was here and now, and I was that canary in the coal mine for a climate crisis that had arrived 100 years earlier than expected. So I had this choice. It was a depressing couple weeks, and I thought I was going to have to retreat, to land. And on land, I'm a terrible man. I'm petty, small, angry. And I'm sure I'd be headed for divorce. But you know, at the end of the day, I think I didn't have a choice. My goal is to die on my boat one day. That's the metric of success. And there was no way I was going to leave my 20 acres. And I've been farming that 20 acres now for 19 years. So I spent the next 5 years just completely, experimenting, stealing ideas, talking to whoever I could to figure out how can I farm the ocean in this era of climate change, in the era of changing oceans. So to rebuild, I started with a couple questions, and they were pretty simple. One was ask the ocean, what does it make sense to grow? The problem aquaculture made, that road it took right out of the gate, was that it grew around markets, not around the ocean. So people want to eat salmon, you grow salmon. The trouble is that's expensive and intensive way to farm. When you ask the ocean, what should we grow? It says, why don't you grow things that don't swim away and you don't have to feed? Because the power of the ocean is you can grow things without feed, without fertilizer, without fresh water, without land. It's an endless source of free nutrients. We don't need cages, we don't need pens. And when you box yourself into things that don't swim away, there are hundreds, thousands of kind of seaweeds and shellfish that it's possible to grow. So there's a drawing of the farm, and it's simple. It's ropes, buoys, anchors. I wish it was more complex. I'd seem a lot smarter, but that simplicity is part of its power, right? That means it's replicable. That means it's cheap to build. The keys is, the other power of the ocean is you don't have to fight gravity. So you can use that whole water column to grow vertically. And you can get an incredible amount of crops. We can do about 250,000 pounds of seaweed and about 500,000 shellfish in 20 acres. The other thing is to be humble in front of the ocean. I started out, and I tried to fight it, right? I had these big buoys that my farm I thought would resist the storms. Instead, the ocean just picked up my farm and threw it along the coast. So I had to learn to be a willow, not an oak. So now the storms come in, I bend with the waves, and then pop back up. So there's the farm from the surface, and there's really not much to see, and that's a good thing, right? Our oceans are the commons, unlike land. With so many stakeholders, it's important we don't privatize those spaces. Instead, we invite the public in. So people come to kayak and scuba dive on the farm. The best fishing in the area, commercial fishing, is actually on the farm because there's so much activity there. The fishermen surround the farm with nets. The duck hunters opposed my farm when we were first starting out. And I said, the point of being a duck hunter is to get up early in the morning, get as drunk as possible, and kill as many ducks as you can. Well, now all the ducks are on the farm. So they can get drunker, kill more ducks, and they know right where they are. But this sort of whole idea of making sure you design around community need and around the commons has been key for social license. So here are the crops we grow. And here's the goal is to sort of have a sea basket approach, a crop for all seasons, do polyculture, not monoculture. There's the kelp, which goes in post-hurricane shoulder season. That's key. We got a lot of fishermen who will just grow kelp. They'll fish all year, and in the winter they'll grow kelp and go back into their into the fishery season. Kelp is this powerful thing. There's something called a halo effect. If you surround an oyster farm with seaweed, the acidity rate is actually lower inside that halo, inside that circle of kelp, than outside. We grow the mussels. Those are lean proteins. They've got lower carbon footprint than lentils. And if you grow them with kelp alongside, you get 20% more production of mussels. These species actually work together rather than compete. We've got the oysters, which are, filter up to 50 gallons a day, come pre-packaged in the water. Scallops and clams, they're slow growing, but it's incredible. You can get actually 500,000 clams under nets per acre. And none of this is new. Like the indigenous folks in the Pacific Northwest were building clam walls thousands of years ago. An Irishman invented mussel farming. He was in a shipwreck in France, and he tried to net some ducks. He put a net up, and the mussel seed all attached to the net, and that's now one of the biggest areas of mussel production in Europe. So why does this matter? One, it's regenerative, right? We need to move beyond sustainability. This is sustainable in that it's zero inputs, no fresh water, no fertilizer, no feed, but it also breathes life back into the ocean, soaking up carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. Think of the kelp especially as the sequoia of the sea. Second, it's replicable. These are the nail salons of the ocean, right? 20 acres, a boat, about $50,000. All it is ropes, buoys, and anchors. You can build a farm. Regular folks like me can get up and started, and that's key. It allows for fast replication. You don't have to be an Amazon or Google to get involved in this sort of set of solutions and being part of feeding your community. It's also scalable, right? The World Bank, which I don't know, I hear its reputation for fake news, but they've got some stats that if you farm less than 5% of U.S. waters, you can create enough protein for 2 trillion hamburgers and offset the agricultural carbon footprint of the state of California. So our goal isn't 1,000-acre farms, banana plantations out at sea, but rather a reef model, 50, 60, 70 farms, 50 acres each along the coast, owned hatchery, processing hub, rings of entrepreneurs, and then replicating that up and down the coast. It's about, we're stuck between this small is beautiful in the regenerative space and big is necessary. This model in the middle of network production, of horizontal benefit, not vertical integration, is where we're trying to go. So I built this, and it was going well, and then the speculators came in. Right? This unholy alliance, I had no idea they existed. Right? They were tech bros, scientific like entrepreneurs, impact investors. All these folks were trying to get rich while doing good was the mantra. I call them fuzzy sharks. They launched companies like Running Tide, $50 million to grow these little kelp pucks, put millions out in the ocean that would automatically drop kelp down into the seafloor and sequester carbon. Google did moonshots of automated robotic platforms that would go all over the world growing kelp. Swarms of underwater robots planting and harvesting. This is Jeff Bezos, it's ExxonMobil, it's Department of Energy in the US. And us farmers who were out there, they sort of patted us on the head, cooing, being like, oh, how sweet and small your dreams are. It was about $1 billion came into the industry. They created this bubble, and every single one of these companies has failed. Hundreds of millions of dollars completely disappeared because folks just did not understand, didn't have the humility of what it's like to farm underwater. And it turned out that this story is not unique. There's a name for it. I think it's the Gartner hype curve. And you have a good idea that's going to be part of humanity's future. It gets overhyped. The speculators come in, the fake it or make it sort of Silicon Valley world comes in. It doesn't work. Bubble bursts. Disillusionment sets in. And then the tech bros go on to the next frontier. And so it's the best thing that ever happened, that the speculators have left. Now, it's left to us, to farmers. We can build something by farmers, for farmers, and we can build it thoughtfully, deliberately. It can be reality-based. So what we did next is we started GreenWave. And the whole goal there was a bottom-up approach, right? It was designed to do 3 things. One is to preference collaboration over competition. Collaboration is our competitive advantage against the fuzzy sharks. Farmer-led innovation, not science-led innovation. Sorry to the scientists out there, but in the farming community, we are pro-science and anti-scientists after working with decades on your sort of gardens. I think of scientists as gardeners, not farmers. And then the third is bending market dynamics, right? How do we steer clear of the fuzzy sharks and build something that's durable. So first thing, we built an ocean farming hub, open source, hundreds of videos, farm design tools, curriculums. We did a Kelp 101 course not long ago. 1,200 people signed up for a 6-week course. Our waiting list is in the thousands. We have a community, about, I think, 7,000 people on there arguing about blue carbon and anchors. They're finding jobs, starting companies. This is sort of the top of the funnel as we try to find and train the next generation of ocean farmers. Seaweed Source is the dating service where folks can, it's about 90 companies where they can meet farmers and figure out forward contracts as demand grows. We've got high-touch support for where we're teaching about, we're helping organize co-ops, arranging for finance for farmers. We've got a national farmer mentorship program. Then we've got something called the Kelp Climate Fund, which is our answer to blue carbon, right? If I had a dime for every time someone called me about blue carbon, I'd be a rich man. All of it's been too slow, and the price is way too low. So we said, what's the goal of blue carbon? It's just to get more kelp in the water. So we created a fund, put out about $1.4 million so far just to pay farmers for their environmental services, and in return, they provide data. We got a MyKelp app, and they're entering, measuring, weighing, then it crunches, shows the ecosystem services, and provides all the harvest data. And then more importantly, we bring the farmers together once a year, and we look at that data. We work on it, we process it, look at it at farm level, regionally, nationally, and from that we become better farmers. We ask new questions, and we keep driving forward in our innovation. The last piece is farmer-owned infrastructure, and this is where we're trying to compete with the fuzzy shark. So we actually use the nonprofit to build hatcheries, processing lines, construct harvest barges. Right? And GreenWave acts as this wedge organization between the companies and the farmers. So a lot of the big companies are trying to privatize seed right now, putting in patents all over the globe. So GreenWave created a farmer-owned seed bank where farmers can bring their seed, we'll bulk it up, and then they can get it back on their farms. The idea is really to try to bend the physics of the free market by a supply chain that's owned by farmers, by nonprofits, by communities. Because the key is we don't need that much. We're not looking for billions. What we want to do is have the resources and the infrastructure in our community and live sort of modest middle-class lives, and that is an incredible competitive advantage as opposed to folks that really want to extract all the profits and have like a 15% return. So we haven't figured this out. No one wants what we grow, right? Kelp is disgusting. I wouldn't eat it. And so we figured out supply. We can produce millions and millions of pounds of kelp. And the markets are kind of there. We started with specialty foods, but that capped out at about 1 million pounds and couldn't grow. But what's happened next is kelp is really emerging as the soy of the sea, where it can be woven into all different industries, whether it's bioplastics, fabric materials, ingredients like sodium alternatives. But where I think the real opportunity is something pretty simple. It's just following the nutrients, breaking down the seawalls between land and sea farmers. Right? If we follow those nutrients, which start on the land, they come down the waterways, come in the ocean, and choke our oceans, right? Causing dead zones all over the globe. I got all the nutrients on my farm that you need. We can use the kelp to collect it up and bring it back to its proper place in the soil. And in fact, whenever societies have had a nutrient crisis on land, they've gone to the sea in order to rebuild that soil. So it's time to do that again. To build this, we've partnered with AgriSea in New Zealand, and I think Claire, I can't see anybody. Claire, I think you're out there. And AgriSea is this incredible family-owned, Maori-owned company that for 25 years has been using seaweed and making this potent, chemical-free biostimulant. It's biostimulant that mitigates abiotic stress, allows farmers to use less fertilizer, less water, and saves them money. Right? So this idea that we can actually grow our natural resources locally and grow our biostim and not use that global supply chain, I think is a game changer for those at least working on the ocean. Seaweed biostim is used by about 0.5% of the global agriculture industry. We pump that up to 5 or 10%, and at least for those of us on the ocean trying to breathe life back to the ocean, it can have a huge effect and help and give regenerative land-based farmers a tool. So just to close, what's exciting about regenerative ocean farming, I think, is that it's a blank slate. It doesn't really exist yet, right? We have this opportunity to build an agricultural system from the bottom up. We can do polyculture, not monoculture. We can protect our seeds. We can lift up communities while drawing down carbon. We can make sure we build something for and by farmers. But at least in the U.S., which is a bloody mess right now, and it's so confusing because I kind of agree with everybody, right? But what's clear is no one's coming to save us, right? We need to save ourselves. It's not going to be government. It's not going to be the tech bros. It's not going to be the environmentalists or the fuzzy sharks, right? And I'm really tired, and many of us in the fishing and farming community are tired of waiting for people to save us, right? I want to chart my own course. So I've been looking to the pirates for inspiration. At their peak, they were 100,000 strong, sailing the globe. They were in Newfoundland, where I'm from. They were founding colonies like Libertania on the coast of Madagascar. And they were just abandoning their old lives and trying to build something new and using new rules. Captains were voted in by direct democracy. Fair wages were created where former slaves and women shared in the spoils. Health insurance. They created health insurance for their workers and invented even the evening cocktail. And so I want to live like a pirate. If no one's coming to help us, we're going to do it ourselves. I want to build farmer-led industry. Our strength is collaboration, blue-collar innovation, and that pride and dignity of work. So at a crisis and necessity, I think this is our opportunity, farmer to farmer, to build something we're proud of, to build something from the bottom up. Whereas farmers, we can figure out how to make a living on a living planet. So thanks so much. Honor to be here.